I've got to hand it to Musk. He seems to have done quite a legendary job wrecking Twitter. He reminds me a bit of the story told of Nero and why this absurd farce continues without much uproar from the investor community is striking. Destroying a struggling company seems rather contrarian to the purpose of capitalist instincts. I think everyone knows that the wheels have come off the advertised pillars of the system. Private equity has been buying companies, siphoning off or pillaging them, and walking away, leaving a dead husk behind. REITs have gobbled up homes, pushing individuals out of contention and into the rental market. Sector after sector has faced wave after wave of consolidation, until entire swaths of the U.S. economy look like a collection of manorial estates. This process is most evident in food and finance. The circumstance of farmers and ranchers, who are often seen as pillars of independence, live now more like serfs. For instance, farmers don't own the seeds of the crops they raise. That right is retained by the agrochemical company they bought the seeds and pesticides from. They can sell the crop, but they can't grow the seeds from the crop. And when they go to sell, they're at the mercy of giant food processing conglomerates that dictate the prices they get. Here, I'll cite a few portions of a Vox report on the plight of ranchers who can no longer participate in a marketplace.
Every Friday, ranchers around South Dakota bring their cattle here, to this livestock auction just outside the small town of St. Ange, to be sold by this man, Justin Tepper, the owner and auctioneer at St. Ange Livestock. Bidders are looking at the cow's weight, breed, and age, and considering outside factors like the weather and the futures market, and it all ends with the highest bidder. This process happens more than 100 times that day. It is price discovery at work, creating a value for a commodity, in this case through friendly competition. The fact that 4 companies buy and process nearly all the beef in the U.S. creates a bottleneck here between them and the feedlot owners, who buy from the backgrounders and the cow-calf producers. The public might only see the vulnerabilities of this structure when disaster strikes, like when a fire took out a Tyson plant in 2019, when multiple meatpacking plants shut down in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic, or in 2021 when JBS underwent a cyber attack, forcing plant closures. During these events, they paid ranchers less and charged consumers more. In a 2021 Senate hearing, a Tyson representative attributed this price spread to the law of supply and demand. Because of closed plants, the supply of live cattle outpaced processors' ability to process those cattle. But many people see the reliance on so few plants to process cattle as exactly the problem.
Cattle producers are saying this is clear evidence of highly concentrated meat packers using their position in the middle of the market to maximize their profits. Packers don't like bidding for cattle. They want to be running their plants at full capacity, and they want to know how much cows are coming in.
That's why about 72% of the sales in 2021 between feedlot owners and meat packers is through a contract instead of an auction, which removes them completely from the price discovery process. The other 28% is still negotiated. But with only 4 big meat packers, there are fewer bids, and they typically don't take place at an auction. Instead, buyers from the packing industry often go straight to a feedlot owner like Ted.
They'll typically go around to feed yards and see their show list.
Many times they don't see any buyers. They may get a phone call from them and say,
"This is what we'll give today."
There's not a competitive nature that happens there.
Not having those competitive bids for the sale between meat packers and feedlot owners means Ted might get a lower price, which means they have less to bid on for the backgrounder, like Brad. And the backgrounder has less to give to the cow-calf producer, like Matthew. And that trickle-down effect is one reason why about 40% of cattle ranches have disappeared since 1980, which means rural America has lost hundreds of thousands of small family businesses. The American rancher often serves as a symbol of independence, but they've lost their independence from the few corporations that control the beef industry and make it impossible to compete.
In a similar vein, the basic concept of personal property is slowly being stripped from our lives in the consumer arena.
We're slowly moving towards a future where we own nothing, and most people don't even realize it. Things you once bought outright have turned into subscriptions. Items you could fix or repair are becoming items you just replace, and things you could sell or trade have become physically unsellable. All to keep a constant cash flow coming in for big companies and providing little benefit for end consumers.
Of the pillars of capitalism, I have to ask, what capitalism? And back in the tech-driven world, our means of communication, the media, and business also take place on giant manorial platforms, which exercise life or death control over those that conduct business through them. It's hard to grasp just how dependent we've become on these platforms, and if they should go down, whether it's eBay, Amazon, Facebook, or indeed Twitter, they will take with them many thousands of livelihoods that have been built around their ecosystem. And we really live in a very precarious and fragile system controlled by a very few people. Taken as a whole, the great champions of capitalism have methodically stripped away all of its ideological virtues, and we've come to a point where the system resembles the system it emerged from, and in many cases shares a lot of traits with the one it labels as its antithesis. We should always remember that the very wealthy in society do talk to each other, and they do share a lot of values. They also influence each other quite considerably. One of the more interesting characters in this whole cohort is a guy named Peter Thiel, who is a venture capitalist who has been quite intimately involved in the careers of Musk as well as Zuckerberg. And he has some very interesting ideas about how the world should be shaped.
Growing up, Peter Thiel was like a classic nerd trope, obsessed with D&D and sci-fi.
That childhood love evolves into a rather interesting outlook. John Gantz pries open a little bit of it, but tellingly, he identifies with the bad guys in these worlds. And elsewhere, he just openly said he prefers Mordor. Gandalf is the crazy person who wants to start a war. Mordor is the technological civilization based on reason and science. Outside of Mordor, it's all sort of mystical and environmental, and nothing works.
Where Thiel was introduced to philosopher and professor René Girard, who influenced Thiel's worldview. Girard wrote about how humans intently imitate each other, and how that holds society back. He specifically pointed to humans' competitive nature holding back scientific and technological progress. Thiel really connected with this viewpoint, and it fueled his belief that monopolies are actually a good thing.
If you're a startup, you want to get to monopoly. You're starting a new company, you want to get to monopoly.
So monopoly is his economic outlook, and his political ones are equally interesting.
Staffing up, Thiel recruited some of his friends from the Stanford Review. The anarcho-capitalist views of that contingent were essential in the founding of PayPal, he explained at Libertopia 2010.
The initial founding vision was that we were going to use technology to change the whole world and basically overturn the monetary system of the world. We could never win an election. on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through a technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics.
He's also investing in tech companies that will help his dark political project, like Rumble, a free speech-focused social network populated almost entirely by the far right. So if Thiel is treating politics like investing, what can his investment strategies teach us about what's to come? Well, the guy loves monopolies.
I have a single idée fixe that I'm completely obsessed with on the business side, which is that if you're starting a company, if you're the founder, entrepreneur starting a company, you always want to aim for monopoly, and you want to always avoid competition. And so, hence, competition is for losers, something we'll be talking about today.
What does it mean when a nation is ruled by a monopoly? One single all-powerful entity? Well, let's just say it's not a democracy.
There should also be some room.
Another big investment area is in ideas. Pretty chilling ones. Let's look at the Dark Enlightenment movement, which Kortz calls an obscure neo-fascist philosophy, and media researcher David Columbia calls the worship of corporate power to the extent that corporate power becomes the only power in the world. One of the movement's loudest voices is blogger Curtis Yarvin. Thiel has invested heavily in Yarvin startups, basically funding a big portion of the Dark Enlightenment movement. And it's obvious the movement mirrors Thiel's beliefs: complete corporate control. And two of his assets, long-term investments he's been nurturing for years, could help that goal. 2022 Senate candidates J.D. Vance and Blake Masters. Both of them worked for Thiel firms, and he's been bolstering their careers this whole time, supporting their projects along the way. Vance and Masters are long-term Thiel investments.
So there you have it, a power-mad totalitarian wolf in capitalist clothing. The only real way to restore a marketplace is to restore the independence and diversity of business in the U.S. That can be done by breaking up conglomerates, and it can be done by encouraging workers to have more say in the workplace through unions, through stock ownership, and through direct ownership of co-ops. And we really need to rethink platforms, because when people's livelihoods become dependent on an ecosystem like that, it really should not be privately held. Not unless we want to live in a centrally planned, command and control, totalitarian system.